Danger Zone.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome back, everyone. Welcome to another Kev Baker Show right here on Truth Frequency Radio, TFRlive.com. I am Kev Baker. I'm your host for the next 2 hours, and I'm joined tonight by my good friend, fellow host on the network, author, researcher, public speaker, and fresh from an appearance on, you know he's my hero, right? Clyde Lewis's Ground Zero. Anthony Patch is here with us tonight as well. Now, for all you regular listeners out there waiting to hear about how Johnny Whistles is, I've been trying to get in touch with him past couple hours. No word yet. Fingers crossed. Hopefully, we might see him in hour number 2. But if not, again, lots of love, prayers, and energy sent to Johnny Whistles as he tries to recover from what sounds like the most horrendous kind of throat infection. I don't know what the heck he's got, but God willing, he'll be back soon with us here on the Kev Baker Show. And before we bring Anthony in, and you can find Anthony's work over at anthonypatch.com. Remember, tomorrow night, Max Egan will be here on the show for 2 hours. Same time, same place tomorrow. Kev Baker Show, TFRlive.com. I know you're all looking forward to that one. Looking at the chat room here, some new names in there. Big warm welcome whether you're in the chat room, listening live on TFR, iHeartRadio, TalkStream Live, TuneIn Radio. So many different ways to listen now. I just want to thank each and every one of you for continuing to support us. And tonight, myself and Anthony are going to be opening up with something called Cassini's Grand Finale. That's right, folks. We are going to be getting into Cassini tonight. And it was back on October 14th, 1997, which just happens to be 19 years ago, 10 months, 1 day, 17 hours, 35 minutes, and 30 seconds ago. Cassini was jettisoned off this planet and started on its journey. And here we are now, nearly 20 years later, Tony, and it's getting ready to do its death dive. I can't wait to get into all of this tonight, but how are you doing, sir? And very, very well done on Clyde's show last night. Loved hearing you on there. Great topics, great information as usual, man.
Well, thank you, Kev. It's always great to be with Clyde. I think that was the 5th or 6th time I've joined him on the air, and I've done 3 of his Ground Zero University events as a speaker. And you know, Clyde and I have spent a lot of time in the studio together when I used to be on the West Coast. And he's so informed on so many topics. The guy is just a wealth of information. So I always learn from him every time I get a chance to join him in the studio.
Yeah, exactly. Every day he manages to put an essay together, the topics that he chooses and strings together. That's what's made him such a firm favourite of mine. And everyone knows that was the place I first heard you. And when you and Clyde team up together, there's a natural dynamic there. The two of you obviously get on. You cover all the same kind of topics. And last night it was just brilliant. And I can't wait to get into some of this tonight because, like I was saying at the start there, Tony, nearly 20 years ago, Cassini blasted off from the planet. And here we are today now, approaching its grand finale. Cassini no more.
Well, 20 years ago, weren't you still in diapers?
Probably, yeah. I can't remember 2 weeks ago, let alone 20 years. You know, I was actually serving my country when Cassini was blasted into orbit. There you go.
Ah, okay. Yeah. Well, we talked a little bit before we came on the air about the military experiences that we've had. And, you know, I just want to give a shout out to our military, all of our active duty people from all of our countries around the world that are trying to knock down evil. So my hat's off to you guys, and we pray for you all the time.
Absolutely, and I echo that. Absolutely echo it. Anyone that's serving right now, if you're listening to this, a major, huge, warm welcome, and get in touch. Let me know. We'll give your unit a shout out if you're not on some kind of special ops. But yeah, a lot of time and respect for the men and women in the military. Now, Tony, this Cassini space probe, is there anything at all that we should be worried about when it's crashing into Saturn?
You mean it's not going to just do a nice soft touchdown into the clouds?
Nah, it's not just going to be a little farewell. Is there any possibility that something could happen here? And I was listening to you and Clyde last night. I mean, we're not looking at the ignition of Saturn, are we?
Well, that was the conjecture. And we came right out and said, this is all conjecture. We're just doing this, what if scenario. But people may have heard of this Project Lucifer, as it's called. And the theory is that the onboard plutonium, and there are 73 pounds of plutonium-238 on board Cassini, that somehow as it enters the atmosphere, which is primarily hydrogen of Saturn, that it might be detonated and ignite the planet and create a second sun, much like was presented by Arthur C. Clarke in the novel and the movie 2010. And the second sun in the sky at the end of that movie was presented. So it was purely just a hypothetical discussion, but it gave us an opportunity to talk a little bit more about thermonuclear bombs, plutonium-238. The fissile version of that is 239. And I don't know, we were more tongue-in-cheek, just kind of having some fun with perhaps a dark subject, even though we're talking about lighting up the sun.
And of course, anyone who wants to hear more about that Project Lucifer, which is a really interesting topic, I think Clyde mentioned this last night as well. A lot of that comes from the research of somebody called Bill Cooper. And before people say, oh, Alex Jones is Bill Cooper, don't even go there, folks. Do not go there. I've seen the conspiracy that's out there. Yes, very similar looking, but for me, no, it's not the same person. He also gets compared with Bill Hicks as well, who's a great comedian. But do not mistake the fact that Bill Cooper was the one that put this information together about the Project Lucifer. But something you said last night really stood out for me, and I want to go back to that. And it's the fact that when they launched Cassini, and this seems absolutely insane to me, but they never sterilized it, Tony. They never made sure it had no biological or organic compounds on it. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And that is the reason that they are directing it into the planet, into the atmosphere of hydrogen, rather than the possibility that once it loses its maneuvering fuel, it might run into Euclides or it might run into Titan, one of the two moons of Saturn, in which they think that, there's a possibility that life might exist or could exist. And then it gets into a whole discussion of if they did ignite Saturn, would it produce enough heat and light energy to melt the ice on the moons and thus be able to sustain, spontaneous growth of bacteria that exists on those moons, possible bacteria that exists on the moons. And so they didn't want to contaminate it with anything from Earth. And so they, just say, well, let's just let it go into the planet and we'll be done with it. Now, there might be more to it than that. We get into the whole idea of the golden age of Kronos, and Kronos is Saturn. And that's something that we've discussed quite a bit. And we'll talk about a little of that tonight again. But that was the primary reason, was because they didn't bother to sterilize it, because they never really felt that there was any issue until many, many years later when, there was testing not only by Cassini, but also spectrometer readings from Earth of the moon, and there was the possibility of water and therefore the thought of biologicals.
Now, Tony, when I look at these space probes, in particular ones like Cassini we're talking about tonight, we've all heard of these coronal mass ejections, and there's radiation flying about in space from who knows where. Does that not damage any of these probes, considering what it does to humans and things like that if we were to try and go into space? Does that not wipe out the electronics on these things?
Well, if we look at the geosynchronous to the sun, geosynchronous satellites that we have on the backside of the sun and on the Earth side, the Earth-directed side, they all have shielding because they're relatively close to the sun for the purpose of monitoring it on different wavelengths. But if you've got something that's doing a flyby and it's not specifically shielded for the purpose of monitoring the sun, and you have a coronal mass ejection take place, yeah, it definitely would damage something like Cassini that is not shielded, that would be flying by at a relatively close distance. And we're talking about faster than light energies in the form of X-rays and gamma rays. Those are synchrotron energies, and those are produced by the sun, and those could intercept the flyby of a satellite, of a probe, of an orbiter, faster than perhaps, we would be able to maneuver it out of the way. So, yeah, there is that chance of that happening.
And I was looking at the cost of Cassini today, and it's mind-boggling. Some of the figures I can't even wrap my head around. But just for the audience here, it cost $1.4 billion pre-launch development, $710 million mission operations, $54 million tracking, and then we've got $422 million on the launch vehicle, $500 million from the ESA was poured in, the European Space Agency. We've got another $160 million from the ASI, not sure who that is. I think that's actually the Italian Space Agency. And this comes to a total of about $3.27 billion, of which the US taxpayers contributed $2.6 billion. Now, Tony, is it worth that? Is it bang for the buck? Did they get all of the kind of data that they were hoping to get for that horrendous amount of money?
Yeah, it does beg the question, doesn't it? Is it really worth it? I mean, what is it about Saturn and its moons that are so important that they have to spend that kind of money? Is it just simply for the discovery of life, perhaps, on those moons? Because certainly in Saturn itself, it's not going to be sustainable for life, because it's primarily helium and hydrogen, as I said, with an iron and nickel core. And it also has a frozen area around the core that is actually metallic hydrogen. And not many people know that, but it is metallic because it is so cold. But what is it about Saturn? So that kind of branches us off into the mythological discussions.
Absolutely, because then we have to bring in the Saturnalian Brotherhood and the fact that in ancient times, and I suppose right up until today, Saturn, it features highly in amongst these elite kind of secret societies, doesn't it, Tony?
It really does. And a tangible one is just to look at the vestments, the clothing that the Pope wears, the white Pope wears. He's got Saturn all over it. And you look at his staff, he has Saturn at the top of the staff. Even as you pointed out, in Antarctica, there's a statue of Saturn sitting in the ice in Antarctica, of all places. So give me a break.
And even, I mean, when you look at Mecca as well, when you see all of these Muslims making the pilgrimage over to the big black cube and then walking around it in circles, I mean, is it just me that thinks that looks like the rings of Saturn when they're doing that? And then, of course, you've got the black cube, which is very, very tied metaphysically to Saturn as well.
Oh, yeah. I mentioned the metallic hydrogen that surrounds the iron and nickel core of Saturn. That metallic hydrogen is in the shape of a black cube.
Say it isn't so.
I will say it is so. That's a prison. That's a prison planet. I told you we'd be going into the mythology of it.
You see, when I heard Cassini, I knew it would spiral off from there into this good stuff. And of course, Tony, when we first teamed up together, we were talking about, theoretically, a connection between Earth here and Saturn's southern pole. And that connection would be made by something called Birkeland currents. Now, let me throw this out here. Is there any way at all that Cassini could be used for some kind of starting point or receiving point for a Birkeland current?
Well, let's label it as conjecture, just like I did with Clyde Lewis last night. And I think if the audience will just give us that latitude to speculate, and perhaps we'll do a great deal more speculation tonight. We'll see where it goes, Kev. But For targeting purposes, Cassini, if it was going to crash into the southern pole of Saturn, I would be getting a lot more suspicious about Cassini. Here's the deal. Cassini basically is going to crash into the midpoint of the planet. It really is not aimed at anything specifically as far as I can tell. But the southern pole of Saturn, if people will look at the NASA images, and that's all we have to go by, there is a spiral at the southern pole. And that spiral is identical to the spiral we saw a few years ago over Norway. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think there's no coincidences in the universe, Tony. And it's definitely very reminiscent of that spiral. And of course, that spiral, it caused such commotion because at the time, Barack Obama, I believe, had just been elected. And correct me if I'm wrong, but there was even rumors he may have seen that spiral while he was flying to pick up his, tongue-in-cheek here, Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah, I think it was a test. We're kind of going off on a tangent, but this is definitely apropos that we talk about this, because that Norway spiral was a test of the Birkeland currents. Because if you look at Birkeland currents in a cross section, imagine taking let's say a hot dog or a sausage, and you slice it, okay, and you look at the end of it. If you do that with the Birkeland currents, which look just like DNA traveling through the cosmos, in lengths as long as multiple light years. They're a twisted helix. They are oppositely charged particles that flow through the plasma of the cosmos. And they're conductive. I call them the plasma conduit. And we'll get into the specifics of that because it has everything to do with CERN. Because CERN produced a test shot of Birkeland currents that then resulted in the Norway spiral, and that spiral is exactly the cross-section of that DNA-appearing twisted pair of charged particles known as Birkeland currents that naturally occur in the cosmos.
Now, we often talk about the HARP facility in Alaska, Tony, but more close to home, especially when it comes to the Norway spiral, would be the ISCAT facility. Now, it's another ionospheric heater, very similar to that at HARP. Would that have been where they could generate enough power to fire up a couple of Birkelands, do you think?
Not to the size of the Norway spiral. I believe the spiral came from CERN itself. I don't believe it was an ISCAT station or a NEXRAD floating platform.
CERN. Don't talk to me about CERN, Tony. I tried to unwind by watching a movie last night. Ocean's Rising, it's called. Disaster movie, B movie. I'm thinking, yeah, I can get away from everything, chill out, unwind, go to sleep. Only to find out that the Brookhaven Collider was involved and CERN as well. I tell you, Tony, I can't get away from this information, man.
Yeah, you did email that to me. What was the name of that movie again?
Ocean's Rising. Long story short, there's a physicist and he's trying to warn USGS and NOAA that the magnetic reversal could be imminent, and our shields that are depleting anyway, the magnetic field, it's going down. So he comes up with a theory that if you create a singularity at the Brookhaven lab and created a singularity down at CERN, then together they would throw off enough, air quotes, gravitons to respin the molten metal of the planet and regenerate the poles again and the magnetic field. But as I was saying to you today, and you answered back, these things don't even exist, right? Gravitons?
No, they haven't been proven, but weren't they trying to employ strangelets from Brookhaven and from CERN?
That's the bit that I really almost choked on my coffee, because they were all celebrating when they did achieve it at CERN. And the physicist sits there and he says, wow, look, it's a quark gluon plasma.
Well, they should have hired you and I as technical consultants because they clearly do not understand the characteristics of strangelets that we've covered here so often. But one of them, the primary one that we focus on a lot, is the fact that they are so dense and so heavy that they cannot be contained in the laboratory and that they plummet to the core of the planet. Now, that means that they're going to attract ordinary matter to themselves at the core. That doesn't mean it's going to restart the spin or change the spin of the core or ignite the core or any of that. We're talking about a neutron star event in which the electromagnetism of the quark gluon condensate, known as strangelets, will attract matter and collapse the planet into a star, into a very dense star.
Well, I'll give them half points then, right? Because when they did create the strangelet, it started making its way towards the center of the planet. And not only that, Tony, but it took the whole of the Alps with it as well. The Alps just disappearing. I was sitting there thinking, anyone who doesn't have any knowledge or anything of CERN, if this is the first thing that they're seeing about it, oh, goodness me, imagine the ideas that people left that movie with.
Yeah, well, clearly the guys that put the movie together, and I didn't see it, but just from what you've described to me, they didn't understand the basics of particle physics. So, there's always creative license involved with movies. And, they're looking for entertainment more than accuracy.
So you were talking there before I went off on that segment about the Birkeland currents being generated. We also mentioned Cassini as well, doing a dive. Unfortunately, not at the South Pole. But I have to ask you, Tony, before we go to the break, we've got about 4 minutes left. Do you see this being the event where we do see Birkeland currents between Earth and Saturn?
As related to Cassini?
Yeah.
No.
No,
I think it'll be a non-event. I think Cassini will plummet into Saturn and there will not be any ignition. But we'll talk about the theory of Project Lucifer after the break. We'll get into the specifics of plutonium and thermonuclear bombs, otherwise known as hydrogen bombs, just to kind of cover the proper physics of what it would take to ignite the hydrogen of Saturn. Because, if you're going to have Project Lucifer out there and people banting it around, I think it's important that you and I provide the accurate science that would be behind a theoretical scenario like that. But I think Cassini is going to be a non-event. I think the timing of it is specific to draw people's attention to it. I will say that Cassini has more to do with ritual than it has to do with hard physics and hard science.
And of course, it will be crashing into Saturn on September the 15th. And that's 8 days before September the 23rd, which we have thrown out there as a date. Not a date where the world is going to end, anything like that, folks. I know people are saying I've said the world's ending on the 23rd of September. Don't know where it came from, but let me just set the record straight right now. We're not saying the world's going to end, Tony, right?
No, not at all. But you mentioned the 15th. Now, that's the day before the conference that you and I are putting on for 2 days on the 16th and 17th of September. So that's 7 days before the 23rd. So Cassini happens, and then our big live stream event for 2 days. And we'll talk about that after the break a little bit about who's going to be speaking and what we'll be talking about. But I think it's symbolic. It's symbolic. Cassini crashes into Saturn, and we have our first live stream conference ever. And we're bringing in some great people, including our very own Clyde Lewis that I was on with last night.
Did you just say Clyde Lewis is going to be a part of this conference as well, Tony?
I did, yeah. He's going to spend about an hour with us, and we're going to talk about full spectrum dominance. And because he's so well read and has talked to so many scientific researchers and otherwise, he comes in with what we call that 30,000-foot elevation perspective on the subject of the full spectrum dominance of this planet.
Absolutely. And, maybe we should email NASA and thank them for choosing a date that almost marks the live stream event. You couldn't do that even if you'd tried. But folks, we're almost on the break. And like Tony says, we're going to come back after the break. And we're going to go through the science behind something that it would take or what it would involve to actually ignite Saturn. And this is because there is more talk of this Project Lucifer at the moment. And like me and Tony like to do, or Tony likes to do, he will give you the hard science behind this when we come back from the break. Don't go anywhere, folks.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
There we go. We are back already, and you're tuned in to tonight's broadcast of the Kev Baker Show right here on TFRlive.com. You can find my work over at kevbakershow.com, and you can find Anthony Patch's work, his books, details about the upcoming conference, Entangled e-magazine, all over at anthonypatch.com. And tonight we opened up by speaking about Cassini. Yes, that's right, folks. We're going to be saying goodbye to Cassini on September the 15th. And that has led us into a conversation about something called Project Lucifer. Now, Project Lucifer, or the Lucifer Project, whichever way you want to put it, was first put forward or researched by somebody called Bill Cooper. And what it kind of speculates or puts forward is the notion of actually igniting a second sun in the sky. Now, Arthur C. Clarke's film, he was dealing with Jupiter, and they say that he only dealt with Jupiter there instead of Saturn because of the techniques that it would have involved trying to reproduce the rings around Saturn. So when we talk about that Arthur C. Clarke film where he done it with Jupiter and named it Lucifer, always bear in mind that probably Arthur C. Clarke's intention was to make Saturn the star of that movie. And when you look at Arthur C. Clarke and his connections to the elites and these secret societies, Tony, I'm very, very suspicious about that character. And he must have been well aware of any plans that may have been afoot by one of these sneaky kind of Freemasonic organizations that wants to reignite a second sun.
Yeah, and, Bill Cooper was talking about the Jason Society, and this is basically a think tank of young, brilliant researchers, multidisciplinary researchers. And it was really the Jason Project that put forth this idea of igniting one of the gas giants. I mean, we've got 4 gas giants in our solar system. We have Jupiter, of course, Uranus, Saturn, and Neptune. And, Jupiter had an impact that took place that they theorized was created a dark spot on Jupiter because of an impact of one of our probes, and that perhaps it had a nuclear device on board. And that was Galileo. That was October 9th of 2003. And it had 15.6 kilograms, or excuse me, it's 15.6 pounds of plutonium-238 on board. And we'll describe 238, 239, and where the 238 is contained both in the Galileo probe as well as Cassini's. But the idea was that in Jupiter's impact in 2003, this huge dark spot was produced. And, the theory is that they tried to ignite Jupiter, and they were not successful. Even though it's a gas giant, it also has hydrogen. But now they're perhaps going to try it with Saturn. But we'll get into talking about the density of the atmosphere of Saturn and some of the, the real technical aspects of what it would take.
And how would that affect us, our human bodies, Anthony, if there was a second sun in the sky? Because we're kind of tuned into the one sun. We get our day and our night. I mean, how would this even appear? It's speculation, but would there be such a thing as darkness anymore?
Well, let's take a cue from Arthur C. Clarke's 2010 at the end of the movie where they had 2 suns in the sky, and they were actually saying there that there was no darkness. That because of the two suns, we never had night. We would have twilight. Now, if you take that and extrapolate it over to and compare the discussion of the golden age of Kronos that Velikovsky put out, that Saturn and Earth and Mars were enveloped in a plasma envelope, and it was a purple haze. It appeared as a purple haze, and Saturn at that time was actually providing sunlight, that it was actually ignited. And at that time, there was no darkness on the Earth, and there was immortality, as the story goes, that no one ever died. And it's sort of this Garden of Eden discussion related to Saturn and Earth and Mars traveling through the cosmos and then being electromagnetically attracted by the sun and separated out. And we get into the whole discussion that the Thunderbolts Project has put out, which I think is fabulous research, not only of the electric model of the universe, but this whole alignment of the planets in close proximity, straight alignment in proximity to the Earth, and these plasma discharges taking place to Earth. And these plasma discharges were the Birkeland currents that we've been talking about, and in the Bible are referred to as Jacob's ladder. And if they are talking about reigniting Saturn, it doesn't mean that Saturn's going to be in that close proximity. But that is part of what I believe is the agenda with CERN, is to actually produce from the particle accelerator the Birkeland currents that will reconnect Earth to the southern pole of Saturn as existed in this golden age scenario that we're sort of laying out very superficially here.
And we know that they would love nothing more than to recreate, albeit artificially, that golden age that they harp back to all the time. But here's the question then, Tony, and let's get into the science of this, right? Because I think a lot of this speculation has started because of the fact that it's got plutonium on board. You've done a great job of explaining last night, and I'd love you to explain to the audience here tonight just why this type of plutonium, the 238, isn't the kind of plutonium that's going to give birth to any kind of second sun, any explosion at all.
Well, thanks, Kev. I would encourage people to just type into Wikipedia thermonuclear weapon or hydrogen bomb, and take a look at the graphics and take a look at the breakdown of the atomic materials, the tritium, deuterium, lithium, deuteride, things like that, and also plutonium. And you'll see what we're talking about here. But in the idea of just a fission bomb, FISSION, fission bomb, which is what we dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This is where you have plutonium-239 as a closely packed ball of plutonium. And that's encased in another ball. And within that larger ball, you have uniformly arranged along the interior high explosive, TNT. And the idea is you simultaneously detonate the high explosives in order to compress the ball of plutonium-239. And it has to be done uniformly, and it has to be done instantaneously. What it's doing is compressing the 239 so that it is even denser, and it reaches what they call criticality. It reaches a critical point at which it spontaneously begins to give off neutron radiation. It's not splitting the atom, it's splitting the nucleus of each of these atoms of plutonium. So therefore, you're giving off radiation. Now that's in a fission bomb. In the thermonuclear design, you have exactly what I said, but it is part of a case that includes a fusion material, fusion fuel, that then also has to be compressed. So you have two weapons within one is what I'm describing. In the case of Cassini, you would not be able to have a fusion bomb, a thermonuclear bomb, go off unless they specifically built a bomb into the orbiter, into the spacecraft itself. The fission bomb made of just plutonium itself would be the more likely because it's a weight-saving device. But if you're going to ignite hydrogen, I'm going to go to the thermonuclear end of it, in which you have two bombs in one, fission and fusion materials. And that possibly, if they built a specific bomb, could ignite the atmosphere. But we're going to back up. That's kind of getting ahead of ourselves. We're going to go back and talk a little bit more about 238, 239. Why is 238 even on board the spacecraft? Go ahead.
Well, why is that, Tony? Answer that for me. Why have they chosen that as their fuel, their propulsion?
Well, it's actually not the fuel. It's not a propulsion device. It is for producing electricity to power the sensors, all of the spectrometers, gravity sensors, gas spectrometers, radio transmission equipment, that sort of thing. What we're talking about here are what are known as RTGs. And these are a radioisotope, which is what the plutonium is. It's radioactive isotope, is plutonium-238. And that radioisotope thermoelectric generator, okay, so RTG, they're using heat to produce electricity to run the instruments. And that is done by the Seebeck effect. The Seebeck effect, very simply, is you have a positively charged semiconductor and a negatively charged semiconductor, which acts as a transmission medium of the heat from the plutonium on one side, passing through those two semiconductors that are negative and positive, and then you have a closed circuit attached to those positive and negative semiconductors. That closed circuit is where you attach an instrument that needs to be powered. And there are a number of these compartments of plutonium and RTGs in the spacecraft itself, powering different systems. It also provides heat, not only for the production of electricity, but thermal heat to keep the instruments from freezing in outer space. Go ahead.
This is why I love geeking out with you, Tony. I just love it. I'm learning something new all the time. I'm out of my comfort zone tonight. I'm usually into the quantum stuff, but this is utterly fascinating, and it's great to clear up all of the conjecture and speculation that I'm seeing flying about on YouTube just now. And you were also given a good example last night, and you also explained it to me during the break, how when they were actually setting off the first hydrogen bombs here, how they were worried they were going to set the atmosphere on fire. And this, in fact, gives us a hint that it's going to be near impossible to set anything on fire up there, isn't it?
Yeah, unless you have the high temperatures of a hydrogen bomb igniting the hydrogen of Saturn itself, these RTGs, these thermoelectric generators, really are not going to pose any sort of a opportunity for igniting anything. Let's look at the density of our atmosphere, which is comprised of, as you know, oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, trace amounts of helium and hydrogen. The overall density of Earth's atmosphere is 1.2 kilograms per cubic meter. So 1.2 kilograms. Compare that to 0.69 grams per cubic meter on Saturn, which is primarily hydrogen, but also has helium in it as well. So we're talking about a very thin atmosphere, and you have to have a high enough concentration level to have sustainable combustion. Even with a thermonuclear device of the size of Cassini, which is 73 pounds of 238, which is the non-weapons grade plutonium. It's just providing heat for electricity. And again, unless they actually incorporate it, and you look at the couple of $1 billion that were expended for this mission, maybe some of that money was used for building a bomb. I don't know. It's pure conjecture on my part. If we see this thing ignite, then we'll know that there was a bomb in there, because it has nothing to do with the RTGs. They cannot be utilized as a bomb.
And with over 5,000 people working on the project, we talk about compartmentalization. Now, obviously not all of those 5,000 know what each and every one of them are doing. However, with so many people involved, Tony, me personally, I think it would be a bit unrealistic to think that they did build some kind of bomb into that. Surely somebody would have known that wasn't right.
Yeah, and also when you look at the idea of a thermonuclear bomb of the size that would probably be needed for such a large planet to ignite such a thin atmosphere, it would be an extremely heavy bomb. And, as it is, it's very expensive. I think it's like $1 million per pound just to put something in orbit around the Earth.
And, it would be far more exciting, I suppose, and far more woo if we were to sit here and just go with the speculation that, yes, they're going to ignite Saturn or Jupiter or one of these gas giants in the near future, but we stick to the facts. And that's why it's great to have Anthony here to break this down, because, Tony, listening to you and Clyde talking about it last night, like I said a moment ago, this isn't my comfort zone at all, but when you're talking about the differences between our atmosphere and Saturn's atmosphere, and the fact that our atmosphere down here never had any problems, it didn't ignite, then even as the most basic layman type knowledge that I've got, then it just can't be it's just a non-starter for me that this is going to ignite into a second sun.
Yeah, I agree. And yet your question that I failed to answer completely when you asked me earlier about what would it be like for life here on the planet if we had that second sun, besides the fact that perhaps we would have perpetual twilight, we would never have actual darkness on the Earth, what that would do to nocturnal animals, what that would do to, the biologicals on this planet to not have those natural cycles of light and day, night and day. The issue becomes what sort of energy would be generated from Saturn if it was ignited. Certainly we would have a higher degree of radiation coming off the planet. And even though it's separated at a great distance from the Earth, we have gamma rays and X-rays that come in and impact our magnetosphere, our shields, all the time, that are produced by star systems throughout the cosmos. And this would be the same situation, that we would have increased levels of gamma rays and X-rays striking our shields. And would that have the ability to penetrate the shields? Again, it comes down to just how much energy is being produced by the ignition of hydrogen. And would it actually move from a dwarf star, which is what it is? Saturn is actually categorized as a dwarf star. It's a dark star. It was ignited at one point before it entered our solar system. So could it become more than just a dark star or a dwarf star and give off more radiation? Well, if we stick to conjecture and we say yes to it being ignited, then I think we would look at this as an existential threat, an extinction level event for this planet, because already our shields are compromised. We've talked about the tears and the holes in the magnetosphere. We've talked about what CERN does in terms of changing the shape and the integrity of our own shield systems, the magnetosphere and plasma, the plasma sphere. If we had additional gamma rays and X-rays coming to us from such a close object such as Saturn, um, that could be the end of all life on Earth, as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely, because for some time now, I mean, we have to take them at face value, but we're told by the scientists that our magnetic shield is basically diminishing. And I would expect if you were to throw more radiation at us, Tony, like you say there, we talk about AI being an existential threat, then I'm afraid this would be just as dire. Now, here we are, right, talking about the fact that there could possibly be two suns in the sky. Yet on the 21st of this month, there's going to be no sun in the sky over your country, Tony. How ironic.
Okay, where's the sun going? Where's the sun going on the 21st? That's a test question for Joe Bag of Donuts out there who's been in a cave and has no clue what's coming up on Monday. So what's happening on Monday, Kev?
Well, I think there's this slight little event that they're calling a solar eclipse. It's not the first one that's ever happened on this planet. However, it's the first time, Tony, that I have seen such a reaction to an eclipse. And I get the fact it's going to be passing straight over the US mainland, coming in over your old stomping ground in Oregon and then working its way down towards, I believe, the New Madrid fault line. But the reaction that I've seen from people, and in no small part due to the media's coverage of this, people are losing their minds, man.
It really is being hyped up. I consider it kind of like, why do people go to horror movies? Why do they watch that stuff on TV? Well, it's a thrill. They like being scared. People like being scared for entertainment. And, it's a spooky thing. And we talk about spooky action at a distance when we talk about quantum entanglement. Well, here's spooky action at not such a distance as this time, in the form of this eclipse. But it's a lot of hype about nothing. There are people that are going to mountaintops in Idaho beneath the eclipse itself, in the shadow of the eclipse. And, they're all, just trying to make a big deal out of this. And you've got millions of people literally that are invading small towns and cities all along the path of totality, as it's called, where the actual eclipse will be darkest, passing over the United States. And this starts in a little town called Depot Bay on the Oregon coast. Yeah, people talk about Salem because that's the capital and it's near the coast of, Oregon, but it's actually Depot Bay. I've spent a lot of time with my kids in Depot Bay, and it's a tiny, tiny little burg, and they're going to be overrun. And a lot of small towns across the U.S. are going to be overrun. I think there is some risk because of the concentrations of people, just because of people and what they do when they get together. But there's no risk from this eclipse itself, other than obviously, the potential for damaging your eyes if you don't protect them.
Well, I was just going to ask that because somebody in the chat room asked what would happen to your eyes if you viewed it just looking at it, and that is not a good idea, and it's not something that myself or Tony suggest anyone does, right?
No. The optic nerve is seared. The retina is burned. You will definitely go blind if you try to look at this thing without protecting. There are a lot of services, a lot of cities that are distributing properly labeled eyewear that are specific for this event, because there's so many people that are going to be out looking at this, this very unusual full eclipse. And we'll get into why that's unusual in just a minute. Well, actually, after the break, we'll talk about the unusual specifics of it. But I really recommend that people use, the cardboard pinhole where you're looking at the shadow on the cardboard on the piece of paper from a pinhole, rather than even trying with, special lenses to even look at it. I don't recommend it. My tactic is I'm not even going to be outside. I don't feel that the elevated UV rays we're already experiencing in the full sun are worth the risk in the case of this eclipse. I think that because of the nature of this eclipse, we are going to have some different types of energies coming off the sun than we are used to. So my recommendation is shelter in place until it passes by.
And, you know, we spend so much of our time now with our faces down into our smart devices. And maybe that's the one good thing I can find that will come from this eclipse. Because for 2.5 minutes, if people are in the path of that, they're going to be thrown into darkness. And I can imagine that's about the one only thing, Tony, that will get some people's faces up out of their smartphones and cause them to look up and see what's going on.
Yeah, this is, because we're going to go to break, this is a harbinger. This is a warning to the Gentiles. So, of course, I'm bringing in some of the theological, some of the Christian, some of the Hebraic into the discussion. But this is a warning sign to the Gentiles.
You see, you have to bring that into the conversation because you need to know your enemy, folks. And our enemy, they are very, very well versed in all of those topics and then some. And when Tony says this is a harbinger, which we'll explain after the break, it most certainly is. And it comes at a very, very key time as well, because we're approaching something called the 500th Jubilee as well. And I'll get Tony to speak to that after the break. So many individual kind of events strung together this year could well lead to something. That's why myself and Tony and our co-host, Mr. Johnny Whistles, who I suspect will be joining us after the break, folks. Don't panic, he's back. That's why we spend so much time telling you all.
This is the Cam Baker Show.
Moving into hour number 2, right here on the Kev Baker Show. We're live on Truth Frequency Radio, TFRlive.com. Don't forget, tomorrow night, coming to us live from Down Under, not 1 hour, but 2 hours with Max Egan. We're going to be speaking about AI, 5G, and moving into the Matrix. And joining us tonight, a big warm welcome back to the show, Johnny Whistles, man. How you doing?
I'm doing okay now, Kev. I don't know what happened. I mean, this thing happened quite quick because I was unwell at work and I was having a really hard time swallowing. It was really painful in the left side of my throat. So they'd noticed it in work, do you know what I mean? And the following day, well, during the night, I thought for some reason that my jaw was that sore. I thought I had broke it, and it was, I couldn't open it. I couldn't do anything. So I went to the doctor and I explained to her what it was. And she says, I know exactly what it is. And she said it's a thing called temporomandibular joint disorder. And for some reason, the cold or whatever it is I had infected that part and gave me this kind of a disorder thing. But it left me, Kev, with I couldn't open my mouth, so I couldn't eat anything. The only things that I could actually get was like soup, like through a straw, and then like a Jaffa cake. As you know, Kev, you don't have to chew a Jaffa cake. You can, do you know what I mean, dismember it with your tongue. And that's what I kind of lived on for a day until my mouth opened a bit and I could actually use a spoon. But it's amazing because 1 in 4 people get this, and yet only 1 in 20 will require you to go to the doctor. And I take it I was that one, Kev, so just the unlucky one. But much better now, mate. I can use my mouth. I can chew, do you know what I mean, without any struggle, and just a couple of wee dizzy things with the ear, but I'm sure that'll be away.
And you know, Johnny, you can imagine my email box. It's full all the time anyway, right? But I have been overwhelmed by people sending their wishes to you, asking if you're okay. And it just serves to show, yet again, just how popular you are with all of the people who listen to this show, because you're the realest guy I know, Johnny, and the listeners get that. They really do. But when you sent me through your diagnosis or the name of this thing you had, I only got as far as temporal, and I thought your jaw had time travelled.
It sounds like it, and it was stuck in a loop somewhere, Kev.
Oh, it's stuck in a loop.
It was the temporal Mandela effect.
Oh, I like that. I like that. Now, Johnny, do you think you caught it up at the work? I mean, you're in there in that classroom environment for a fortnight. It must have been like a petri dish, dude. Who knows what else you've picked up?
Kev, I think that is definitely hit. Do you know what I mean? There was a wee guy there as well. The same day, had a really bad asthma attack, and he forgot his inhaler. Do you know what I mean? Oh. So I think it probably is that, Kev.
Well, it's just so great to hear you back with us. And you know, Tony, it's just not the same without our strange quark, is it?
Oh, I mean, it takes three of us to make this thing happen around here, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's like, I would say, it's like an unholy trinity when the three of us team up together, Tony.
Oh, wait a second. We're not unholy. Wait. You're putting you and Johnny in the wrong camp.
Are we in the wrong camp there? Is that what it is? I've got it all wrong. You see, I 180'd it. I'm 180ing too many things, Tony.
No, we're the good guys. We're the good guys.
We are the good guys. And before the break, we were touching on Cassini, and then we moved into this eclipse. And Tony, you were saying it's quite a strange eclipse, and it's a harbinger. Talk to us more about what this eclipse means and who it's intended for.
Well, a solar eclipse is a harbinger, a warning to the Gentiles, and has been all through history, recorded history. When we have a lunar eclipse, it's a warning or a harbinger to the Jews. So in this case, it is a sign from the Lord saying, hey guys, it's time to look up because your redemption draws nigh.
And that's even the shape of this eclipse, the shadow that it casts. It's going to be strange as well, isn't it?
It is. It is in the shape of an egg. And according to what I've read, and I've looked at this pretty extensively, this is the first time in recorded history that the shadow of the eclipse is in the shape of an egg. And it is what is known as the ogdoad. If you go back to Egyptian times, they consider an egg-shaped eclipse, which this appears to be the first one that's been recorded, is the harbinger of the warning of a new race of beings being birthed. And they call this the ogdoad, and this relates to the Egyptians, their 8 leadership deities. And so there is a mystical, there is a spiritual aspect to this. And therefore, I think it points us in the direction. It's like, okay, look up. Do you see what I'm showing you? Yeah. Well, keep looking up because September 23rd is right around the corner, 7 days later.
It's the fact that that comes so soon after that you have to really pay attention to this, isn't it?
I think so. I'm not trying to be, fear-mongering. I'm not trying to be any of that stuff, but I do think that it's worth paying attention to September 23rd because it is described in the book of Revelation in the Bible. This doesn't mean the world's coming to an end. It doesn't mean that the rapture is happening. It doesn't mean any of those things. But let's talk a little bit about what it means to those on the dark side of the equation.
Exactly, because these secret societies, they will be very much aware of what's going on in the skies. They look for the signs in the skies, and this is a major one, Tony, an absolutely major one.
Yeah, and I want to acknowledge Valkyrie in the chat room saying it is an astral representation of the Ouroboros. I agree. Now, an Ouroboros is the snake eating its own tail. And if you look at, and I'm not saying look directly at, but if you look at pictures, images of the eclipse, you will see that there is the corona around it, the edge that is visible around the moon. And that is the Ouroboros that is described or prescribed by the eclipse. And that is this endless cycle, this symbol of the snake eating its own tail, that never-ending cycle. And that, Kev, is reminiscent of our discussions about quantum computers, AI, recursive neural network, endless loop, snake eating its tail process of programming quantum computers and AI specifically. So there's some crossovers back and forth here.
Well, there's huge crossovers because one of our newest listeners wears a T-shirt with that Ouroboros on it. And that is, of course, Gordy Rose. Because
Yes,
when he was
indeed.
making his presentation in which he tipped his hat towards Mr. Anthony Patch and the Freaky Friday crew, he was wearing the new T-shirt from his Kindred AI company. And the logo for that, lo and behold, is the Ouroboros. You couldn't make this up.
Nope. And the timing of his wearing of that T-shirt and presenting it at the Tech Vancouver presentation, a science presentation, and he led off his presentation, as you said, by acknowledging you and myself talking about the Mandela effect. And you got to ask yourself, why would this guy take time to highlight a couple of guys from the truther community? So it's a tip of the hat to us, but I think it's also very interesting, the timing of his wearing of that T-shirt with the Ouroboros, because it's right just a few weeks ahead of this eclipse coming up on Monday, the 21st. And then we have 7 days, and 7, as you know, is significant. It's perfection in Scripture, biblical Scripture. 7 days later, we have the 23rd, and we'll talk about the 23rd in just a second. But yeah, I think there are enough ties here to the shape being an egg, the discussions in the secret societies of a new race of beings being birthed. We've talked about the technology side of that. We've talked about the resurrection of the dead, the defeating of death, all that stuff.
We can go back to the start when I first heard you mention on one of our shows about this Ogdode. And yet here we are again now talking about an eclipse, an Ogdode shape. You really could not make this up.
No, and I think that they timed their development of, technology. And I'm saying I'm saying those that worship Lucifer. And therefore, I think that they time all of their technology to kick into gear at specific times, because everything they do is based upon observation of the planets that they assign deity names to and characteristics to, and certainly the constellations, astrology, as well as astronomy. So all of these things are timing what they do in terms of implementing their technologies. And one of them happens to be what we're talking about with Gordy Rose, is D-Waves, quantum computers, and AI.
The D-Wave. Now, before we move on, Tony, I want to clear something up here, because Jane in the chat room, great point, and I kind of caught this myself, but the actual eclipse is the 21st of August. And then fast forward to...
I'm sorry. The 7...
Yep, I'm only correcting that because if there's, what people on YouTube will be like, they will say, everything we've said is all bunkum because of that one error. And an error only becomes a mistake if you fail to correct it. So we'll just clear that up now.
Let's clear it up, because the 7 days, I'm sorry. See, I'm talking about our conference.
You see,
on
you're
the
looking
16th and 17th.
You see, the eclipse is a sign in the sky for the conference as well.
It is.
That's what
it's a sign in the sky to the conference. Yeah, the conference that you and I are putting on is the 16th and 17th. And that's roughly, depending on which day you choose, the seven days before the 23rd. So that's where I got that mental block going there. I apologize.
No, that's perfect. And thank you, Jane, and anyone else who picked up on that in the chat, because none of us are perfect here, and we need you lot out there to keep us right. And I want to come to Johnny now, because, John, wasn't that long ago we had an eclipse in Scotland. Now, we weren't in the path of totality, like America's going to be. And it was the Faroe Islands where I watched a video of where it went dark for about 2.5 minutes. Absolutely spectacular. It really was. But John, I imagine, right, when these things in the sky happen, there's going to be lots of live streams from NASA, the European Space Agency, things like that. And wouldn't you think it'd be a good idea if people aren't in the path of totality, if they want to see this in all of its glory, the best way would actually be to witness it from inside, watch one of these streams, right?
Yeah, it would, Kev, but I think it's to see it yourself with your own eyes, I think, is the reason that everybody is actually going nuts over this. And the fact that it's going from like west to east or east to west, whatever, right across the US, it's probably never going to happen again in a lifetime. So it probably isn't. If I was there, Kev, I would definitely make sure that I didn't miss it.
You see, he'd be one of these cats heading to Salem, Tony. He really would.
Well, that's fine. I mean, that's as long as you're properly protected as far as your eyes and that sort of thing. But
see, I'm more couch potato. Yeah. I would rather put my feet up, have my popcorn, sit and watch the stream, watch for it buffering and all that kind of nonsense. Get to see the perfect Ouroboros, not burn any eyeballs out. All good.
Yeah. And think of the practical implications. If you've got millions of people literally in the United States that are all heading to the path of totality, then gasoline prices go up, you have crowds, you have traffic, you have hotel and restaurant prices going up. There's already a lot of uproar about price gouging going on. So, it isn't worth the hassle. If you really want to see it, just watch it on television or on the internet. It's a lot easier.
Now, should we be worried about the fact that it is going close to the New Madrid fault line? I've looked at space for a long time. There's a lot of conjecture and speculation when there's alignments and things like that the Earth shakes. Now, like I say, we've had many an eclipse in the past. I'm not sure if there's any correlation with earthquakes, but do you think there's any danger at all, Tony, that anything like that could happen when it hits the New Madrid?
No, I don't think so. I think if the New Madrid or Madrid is going to let loose, it's going to be much later. I think it's going to be many years from now.
You see, Johnny, we've been killing all of the woo tonight, but that's because we're trying to keep this as factual as we can, because, Johnny, you cruise about YouTube like I do, and some of the videos I've seen, some of the claims that people are making, I mean, I like to live in the land of speculation, right? But these guys are going too far out, even for me.
Oh, some of them are. I've watched a few of them, Kevin. The thing is, you can't get by the first 5 minutes because everything that they say, you're like, I mean, seriously? You kidding me on? No, it is. But then again, Kev, thousands of people watch these things and it's pure clickbait, if you ask me.
Absolutely. You'd hit the nail on the head there, Johnny. Now, before the break, Tony, I was saying how this is quite a significant event as well, because we've got a 500th Jubilee coming up as well. Could you explain that not only to the audience, but to me and Johnny as well?
Yeah, definitely. And I want to preface it by saying that I think that there, on the dark side of things, I think that this harbinger, this eclipse, really is going to be an opportunity for the dark side to participate in their rituals. They're not going to let this go by without significant spiritual rituals going on within the United States, and certainly within the path of totality. So that would be more of my concern than anything else, is what are they cooking up in their, witch's cauldron, so to speak. But to be specific to the 500th Jubilee, this is the re-reformation, as the Vatican is calling it, the re-reformation of the Protestant Church being brought into the fold of the Catholic Church. And the Pope on the 23rd will be celebrating this 500th Jubilee of the Reformation, which he's now calling the re-reformation. So if we go to Luther and we look at the Lutheran Church and the separation from the Catholic Church of the Lutheran denomination, so to speak. The Pope has convinced the Lutheran Church to come back into the fold. Now, last year, and Clyde and I talked about this last night briefly, the leaders of all the major religions of the world met last year with the Pope at the Vatican. And it is my sense of what's going on that the Pope perhaps on the 23rd will announce the one world religion.
You know, if any Pope has got any kind of likelihood of doing something like that, it's got to be this Pope here. Because I've said in the past, I mean, I'm no Catholic. John is not a practicing Catholic, but born into that. For me, I mean, what this Pope has done, whether you like the Vatican, the Catholic faith, it's by the by, but he has absolutely diluted it to the point where it's almost unrecognizable, Tony.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, this all has to do with the Pope setting himself up, and this is with all the popes, setting themselves up as a intermediary between us and Jesus Christ. And that flies in the face of what Jesus taught and what Scripture shows us. And that is the only way to God is through Jesus Christ. The Pope plays no role in this. And this Pope, I think, is pure evil.
And, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not well versed in the Bible at all, but I've heard in the past people saying that in the Bible, I think Jesus says that you don't even go to any kind of church because you find Christ within yourself. Going to some building that claims to be of God, that's not right. Is that right, Tony?
Yeah, it isn't necessary for a church or a denomination or even an organized religion. This is a personal relationship between you and Jesus Christ. And that comes to the decision to repent of your sins, to accept Jesus Christ, acknowledging him as your Lord and Savior, and to accept the Holy Spirit into your heart. And that is often called the sinner's prayer. And then it moves on from there, and it becomes a constant state of repentance, a constant state of prayer and turning your attention, your face to Jesus Christ, and your attention to learning from him. And as you know, I described, and we had a guest on not long ago, Kathleen Urquhart, who talked about this point of anguish that you need to reach in your life, this point of anguish in which you give up all control of your life. You give up your life. You literally are giving up your life to Jesus Christ. So it's more than just a sinner's prayer, and I don't want to go into a long discussion about this because, you know, we'll cover this in our conference on the 16th and 17th of September, but this concept of anguish is valid and is valid in Scripture. But yeah, you don't need a pope, you don't need an organized religion. All you need is Jesus Christ.
You know, that point of anguish that you speak about and Kathleen addressed so eloquently on your show, it reminded me of a story that my mum told me not long ago, just after the heart attack, in fact. And she was saying how it doesn't matter who the person is, but they were a bad egg, you know, always in and out of trouble. And one thing led to another, and they ended up being jailed for the night. And that point of anguish came, Tony, because this person, they fell to their knees and they said, well, if there's anything out there, then show yourself, just come and help me, because I don't know where I'm going. And you can imagine they actually did receive an answer. And that, for me, is an example of what yourself and Kathleen and so many others speak about. And me personally, for the audience out there, I honestly don't care what your own personal beliefs are. But what is important, that we all appreciate what these elites and these secret societies are into. And it isn't Christ, and it isn't anything good. And it rhymes with Saturn, which we were talking about earlier on, and it's Satan. That's what it all boils down to, Tony.
The worship of the black sun, which is Saturn. And Saturn is known as Satan. That is what the name is, in fact, in the translation. And as I said earlier, the vestments, the clothing, the robes of the Pope actually have Saturn on them. This is all about the worship of Lucifer. This is their black sun that is represented even at Mecca, as you said, with the black cube. The black cube referring to the black cube within Saturn itself. And this is what they choose to break open, is this black cube, this prison, and release their deities from imprisonment, utilizing the Birkeland currents from CERN to reconnect to Saturn and accomplish this. And at the same time, opening the doorway to the abyss and allowing these entities from Saturn that they openly worship, and allow those entities to come to Earth and to actually open the abyss and release the dead, release the entities from the abyss itself. All of these are concurrent events. And if you want, we got about 2 minutes, but after the break, we can talk about the technology at CERN that will produce that. But September 23rd is also in Revelation 12, describing the dragon, which I view as the spirit of the Antichrist, gathering a third of the stars, which are the third of the angels from heaven, which are the fallen angels of Satan, and casting those spirits to the earth. So there is a spiritual event that is going on the 23rd. Does it mean that something physical is going to manifest on the planet? Not necessarily, but certainly the dark side believes, and therefore I think the rituals starting on the 21st will set up for the 23rd, and the spirit of the Antichrist and these fallen angels, their spirits being cast to the earth. And how that will play out, we're going to have to watch and see.
That all comes just a month after the Ogdode eclipse, which represents the birthing of a new race. See how it all ties together now, folks? And we've got about a minute left. But Johnny Whistles, we were talking about the Pope there. We've covered him ad nauseum. But if any Pope's going to call for a one-world religion, Johnny, it's got to be this current one, right?
Well, you would think so, because there's that many people, Kev, out there that have been basically hypnotized by this guy and the whole Catholic Church. I'm like you, Kev. I mean, my mum used to give me 2 threepenny pieces to go, and one of them was to go on the plate. And I always thought, where does the money go? I mean, there's not somewhere you can post it to heaven. So I stopped and got that look of disdain. But anyway, join us just after the break. We'll get 3 minutes to spare. Go make yourself a coffee.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
We are moving into the final part of tonight's broadcast of the Kev Baker Show, right here on Truth Frequency Radio, TFRlive.com. Don't forget to tell all your friends and relatives, bombard social media with links, not just to the Kev Baker Show, but any of your favourite shows right here on the network I regard number one. And that's not just because I'm a host here. I used to listen to TFR and Chris and Cherie Geo long before I ever got a hold of a microphone. And it makes me so, so proud to be here. And it's a pleasure to be here every night. Used to be an hour-long show. Now it's 2 hours. And I'm finding that isn't even enough. My word, I'm an addict. I'm a glutton for punishment. I've got my main man, Johnny Whistles. He's back with us tonight. And my other main man, Anthony Patch. He is here too. And Anthony, you're an author, a researcher, a public speaker, and now you're putting together your very first conference, Full Spectrum Dominance. Talk to the audience about that for a brief moment before we get back into the CERN.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. And we're going to do a live stream that will cover a number of topics, but Full Spectrum Dominance is, in short, a application of biblical scripture with a outline provided by The Art of War by Sun Tzu, because we are moving into a heightened state of spiritual warfare. And therefore, we need to prepare people. And we will be providing specifics Always we're trying to be solution oriented, but we are going to talk about specifics as to what people can do individually and with their families to gear up for this spiritual warfare that we're entering into. People talk about, these are the last days. Well, what do you do about it other than just talk about it? So we're going to have, as you said, Clyde Lewis will be joining us. We also have Alana Freeland, who will be talking about the space fence and full spectrum dominance as well. And we'll have David Heavener joining us talking about a very touchy subject, a very difficult subject, which is pedophilia and child abuse, and bringing in his perspective of the ritual abuse that takes place within Hollywood. He is a Hollywood producer, and he'll be talking about his upcoming Christian-based television series, which is The Last Evangelist. And we'll also have author and speaker Kathleen Urquhart, who we've had on the show twice now, who will also be presenting. And yours truly, Kev Baker, will be there along with myself. So it's 2 days. We're only seeking to cover our costs, so we're only asking for $10 per day for people to log in. Registration will start on Eclipse Day. It will begin on the 21st on Monday. Registration will be open. And we will also provide the live stream after the 16th and 17th of September so that people who are not able to watch it live can access it later, and we'll have it open for at least 30 days, perhaps even longer than that after that weekend. So that's the long and short of it. We have a couple of other people that we're trying to finalize the schedule with, and we'll have more information and the full outline posted in a matter of days to anthonypatch.com, and we have a couple of promotional videos that my great friend Robbie and his wife Cheryl have put together. They are providing the technical support. They are providing the live streaming. They're the ones who really are doing all the hard work on this conference, and I can't thank Robbie and Cheryl enough, and their services are top-notch, professional, and I highly recommend them for what they're providing to us. And they're also the publishers of Entangled Magazine, and Entangled Magazine is sponsoring the Full Spectrum Dominance Conference on the 16th and 17th of September.
Robbie and Cheryl, I mean, there's two highlights of our time on radio, just two of the many, because without having these shows that myself, Whistles, and Johnny do, myself, Whistles, and Tony do, we would never probably have come across the likes of Robbie and Cheryl. And just to give you an indication of the kind of guy Robbie is, when John took sick the other day, unfortunately, the guests, they had to cancel as well. And I was thinking to myself, 2 hours? I could barely do 1 hour myself. And, without even asking Tony, Robbie offered up his time. And I thanked Robbie, and I explained to Robbie that I would prefer to actually prepare for a show with him and Cheryl. I wouldn't want to just draft him in at the last minute, because he's done so much for us, and I want to make it the very, very best of show when he does come on, hopefully in the very near future. Now, before we get back into this, Tony, I'll address the chat room here. Esther, a new name, sorry if I've not seen you before. Brilliant question. How can you make it a one world religion? I just don't get it. And I'm sure we can quickly address that, because there's the Hegelian dialectic. You can have a problem, a reaction, and a solution. And if you create a problem where all of the world's people are crying out for some kind of solution, be it a war, be it anything like that, then at that point, you could have the offering up of the solution, which would be their aimed goal anyway, of a one world religion. And Johnny, you hit the Project Bluebeam, and that's the perfect thing, albeit theoretical, to bring about a new world religion. You would have religious deities projected into the sky. They could use voice to skull technology, where you would literally hear what you would think is the voice of God, Jesus, Buddha, Mohammed, whatever religion is appropriate to you, you will hear that in your head. And they'll urge you, that voice will urge you, the only way out of this is to come together, the whole world under one banner, under this new world order religion. And that there is how they could bring about, quite easily, a one world religion. Tony, Johnny, your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think as you say, it doesn't matter what religion that you follow or don't. Whatever it is going to be projected in front of you. The person in front of you actually might not see what you're seeing. They're seeing their God, their deity. And as you say, it is the only way that you could possibly get everybody to actually turn to a one world religion, Kev. Because, it doesn't matter who or which religion, they're going to say that theirs is more powerful and more real. Do you know what I mean? Like the Catholic one. Do you know what I mean? So it's the only way it can be done, Kev. But to fill our head, as you say, and to fill our brain with the voice of this thing, telling you, listen, this is the way to go.
Absolutely. And Tony, we're seeing the Islamic, the more radical, extreme side of the Islamic faith facing off against Christianity and Judaism right now. And if that was to come to some kind of head, then that as well could be used as a crisis to bring about the one world religion. What do you think about that, Tony? Anything else to add to that?
Oh, sure. There's lots to add to that. But, if you look at the Jesuits, they are the ones who will set up Jesuit against Jesuit and religion against religion to create division, to create strife, to create the problem. The solution is offered as, okay, if you're tired of all these religious battles, then we can eliminate all these battles and these wars by having a single religion, which is their solution they're offering. And along with that is a single worldwide leader of the religions, of the single religion, which is, the false pope, the false Messiah, if you will, but he's not really a Messiah. The Pope is setting himself up as the leader of this one world religion. And then you have the idea of the Antichrist being the one world leader, again, as a solution to all the division and strife politically as well as theologically. But what it comes down to is your personal relationship with Jesus Christ. That's how you prevent being deceived. And it isn't just the sinner's prayer. You can't just say, I repent of my sins and I accept the Holy Spirit. That doesn't do it. That's not the end of it. It requires that you actually give up yourself, that you give up your control, that you give up your life to Jesus Christ so that you can hear the Holy Spirit, you can hear the leading, so that you have that sensitivity to what's going on, because that will prevent you falling victim to a single world leader, a single world religion, a false hope, and therefore the Holy Spirit will guide you through that and reveal to you much more than you could ever determine or be able to interpret on your own. If we rely on our own humanity, then we will be deceived through technology, as Johnny was talking about, and also through the deception of our political and our military and our theological leaders, which are all pulling together under the Antichrist and under the Pope. So it comes down to this point of anguish. You have to understand that you have to come to a point where you absolutely give yourself up to Jesus Christ. It's not just the sinner's prayer.
And, in true synchronistic fashion, as happens on TFR, if this one world religion comes about, I've got a very good idea where it's going to be based. And tonight, myself and Johnny, we like a soccer team here in Glasgow, Tony, football team for anyone in Europe, called Glasgow Celtic. And they play in green and white hoops. Now, they're predominantly actually a Catholic team. But get this, I never knew we would be talking about this tonight, but they were playing a team in the European Champions League tonight for qualification. And that team just happened to come from Kazakhstan. And the name of the team that we were playing just happens to be Astana. Now, for any new listeners out there who have not checked out the New World Order capital of Astana, because that's what it is in my opinion, please do so. Because they've got a pyramid built there where the religious leaders of the world will one day sit. Right in the capstone of this pyramid. Below them will sit the World Council, a big table shaped like an eye that comes... It's quite weird to explain. You need to see the pictures of this, and I hope Johnny's going to be digging them up. But this is the middle floor of the pyramid, and below the world kind of governments where they sit round this table, there's a domed theatre. And that's where the common man, the person, will sit to go and get entertained. And the roof of that dome actually makes the eye-shaped table on the floor above. Now, I'm not making this up. Johnny Whistles, you've seen this place. You've looked in depth at Astana as well. And anytime Celtic or any team come up against them in the football, I have a little smile on my face because I know so much about that New World Order template kind of flat pack city that came out of nowhere, man. It looks like something out of a Freemasonic sketchbook.
It is incredible, Kev, the level of technology that's used and the symbolism. Not only that, Kev, as you say, this is going to be like a New World Order headquarters. It is tailor-made. And anybody that hasn't seen Astana, have a look at some of this. The architecture is incredible. As you say, pyramids as well, Kev.
Absolutely.
Unbelievable.
We're going to do a show on that one night, Johnny. But Tony, so sorry for taking up so much of the time there. We were going to get into CERN as well. We've got about 12, 13 minutes left. And CERN does tie into all of this. And it's through CERN that we met in the first place. And this is this golden thread that connects everything together again, because here we are years later, right? We're still talking about these things and everything is still in play. Now, how does CERN tie into the Birkeland currents and the birthing of a new race?
Well, the mechanics of it is what we'll talk about very briefly here, and that is that the ring-based particle accelerator that is joined up now with the linear accelerator awake will be producing 20 peta-electron volts. It'll be directed at the north area, which is the center point of the main ring. In the acceleration of particles in the main ring in opposite directions at near the speed of light, you end up producing what are known as synchrotron energies, which are gamma rays and X-rays, but you also at right angles produce magnetic lines of force. This results in a donut-shaped field of magnetic lines of force, which is known as a toroidal field. That's what our magnetosphere and our magnetopause, our shields around the Earth, form, is a toroidal field, a donut of magnetic lines of force. Now, CERN will be producing that, but then above that, above this donut, so to speak, will be the torsion field, which is a twisted field. Picture taking a aluminum soda can, grabbing the top and bottom between your hands and twisting the top and bottom in opposite directions. That twisted configuration of the can is what a torsion field is. And then emanating from the center point of both this torsion field and the toroidal field will be the Birkeland currents, the twisted helix of oppositely charged particles coming from the north area of CERN's main ring, which will then be projected through the plasma of the universe, the cosmos. The plasma will result in what I call the Birkeland currents being a plasma conduit of electrical current that will connect to the southern pole of Saturn, which, as I said earlier in the show, is a spiral at the southern point of Saturn. And that's the cross-sectional configuration of Birkeland currents. Now, connecting from the southern pole through Saturn itself and through the black cube of frozen solid hydrogen will be the Birkeland currents that are already existing in Saturn, that are produced by the northern pole of Saturn, which, just like CERN, just like the Large Hadron Collider, is a synchrotron particle accelerator with oppositely moving charged particles. The same thing is occurring at the northern pole of Saturn. That is, if you will, a naturally occurring synchrotron particle accelerator. We have seen the images of the northern pole, which shows the contra-rotating clouds of particles, just like the particles at CERN. Those contra-rotating particles produce this hexagonal shape that we see due to the eddy currents of these clouds. But the center portion, just like the center of CERN, produces the Birkeland currents that already exist, that travel from the northern pole of Saturn through the black cube and to the southern pole of Saturn. That's what they're connecting to. Once the connection occurs, they'll be able to break apart this solid hydrogen black cube, and therefore be able to, in their practices, their mystical society practices, free their deities from the black cube, which then those deities, those spirits, travel as energy back along the Birkeland current plasma conduit back to CERN and the opening of the abyss, because CERN is located over the doorway to the abyss. Go ahead.
That's not speculation. It literally is situated above. Is it Apollo's temple, Tony?
Yeah, it's Abaddon, Apollyon, the Destroyer. It's an ancient Roman temple site.
And for anyone that's joined us late, the best example of these Birkeland currents possibly could be to look at the Norway spiral that happened back in 2008, I believe it was, sometime around then. And we were speculating earlier on that that might well have been some kind of test just to see the likelihood and the potential for actually doing this. Now, Tony, we're talking about this opening the abyss as well, releasing these entities. And of course, this ties in very much to the Ogdod birthing of the new race, right? I mean, for anyone new that hasn't caught our shows before, I know we've only got a couple of minutes, and I urge anyone, check out any of our past shows, not just with Kev Baker here, but any show Tony's been on. He's explained this in great depth back at the start when he burst onto the scene. But I'd love you just to share with the audience how that translates into a new race of beings.
Well, this is the raising of the dead. If you go back into Egyptian, Babylonian, Sumerian writings, they're always focused on the defeat of death and the resurrection of the dead. And we go into this whole discussion about DNA modification, the defeating of death through the modification of DNA, the human longevity projects that Dr. Craig Ventnor that we've highlighted, but many others. The whole idea is that they want to open the doorway to the abyss to be able to raise the dead. This is literally the resurrection that they are seeking. And if you look at Revelation 9, you will see this playing out, and it is described as part of what is released is the locust army. So we're talking about literally opening the doorway to Hades, to hell, and bringing that into this reality and revising this reality dramatically. And this is not something that is just conjecture. This is biblical truth. And it is not by accident that CERN is located over what has since the Roman and the Greek times, been considered the doorway to the abyss, because they built first a Greek and then a Roman temple over the location of where CERN is located now. So we have a concurrent set of events going on. We have this whole scenario with Saturn that we just laid out. We have in Revelation 9 the opening of the abyss. All of this happening due to technology being the particle accelerator at CERN. And their open statements of wanting to open a doorway to other dimensions and to send something in, and by their own statement, they're not sure what's going to come back through. And we've outlined the number of scientists, that, including Hawking, who are saying, you don't want to be doing this. It's not going to end well for humanity. But these megalomaniacs believe that in their way of thinking, their Luciferian thinking, that this is a good thing to do. And what they don't appreciate is that they will not achieve immortality. And all you have to do is look at the book of Revelation to see how this turns out. But this is the greatest existential threat to humanity that has ever existed, and it's embodied by CERN.
And if people wonder where we get this kind of stuff from, we're not just dreaming it up. It's not science fiction. This comes from the actual scientists themselves. And we talk about opening doorways to the abyss. Well, if you look at the picture I've just posted in the chat, and I'll describe it for the audience who aren't in the chat room, can somebody explain to me why 4 of the CERN scientists are stood there proudly with a big, huge key? What do you think they're actually trying to signify there? What is it they're symbolizing? They are giving you a pictorial kind of representation of what myself, Tony, and Whistles have been telling you for years now. They literally want to open a doorway to the abyss. And when you factor in the geographical location of where CERN is and what it sits upon, like we were just describing a moment ago, I say it all the time, but you could not make this up, Tony.
No, and go look at the ceremony, the video on the Gothard Tunnel. The Gothard Tunnel was announcing the opening of this doorway to the abyss and everything that's going to come through.
You know, somebody sent me a video today from one of my favorite bands, actually, the Imagine Dragons, and they've got a song out called Thunder. Now, we're talking about the birthing of a new race, right? Well, get this, because the video for that actual song they've got out just now, Thunder, and they're a huge band. Many, many people will be watching this. It just happens to have reptilian humans in it. Now, I know they're reptilian because they keep flicking out their forked tongues. All of this at a time when we're birthing a new race, when they're opening portals to the abyss, when we're about to see a sign in the sky which represents an egg-shaped, an egg, think of that, giving birth to. Tony, everything's coming together for me. It really is.
It really is. And I just want to say, don't be fearful. Just turn to Jesus Christ.
Absolutely. We don't do fear on here. Fear is false evidence appearing real. And anytime myself, Johnny, or Tony give you anything that's incorrect or false, then we rely on you to correct us, because we don't knowingly put out anything false. We, in fact, try to kill the fear. I've said it many, many times. When you're informed, that, for me, takes the fear out of everything, because then you can prepare and nothing's going to shock you. Absolutely nothing. And with these times that we're moving into, there's going to be plenty out there that could shock us, but none of this, audience. I am fully confident in that. Tony, thank you again so much for everything you do, not only on the Kev Baker Show, but for everyone out there, man. And we'll have Tony back. I'll be back with Tony on Friday night. We'll have Dane Wigington on the show. I'll be back tomorrow with Johnny and Max Egan right here on KBS Live. Until then, folks, wherever you are, make it TFR and stay tuned for Lucky and Dr. Brooks Agnew after the break. Over to you, Whistles.
And didn't touch that dial.
Ah, okay. Yeah. Well, we talked a little bit before we came on the air about the military experiences that we've had. And, you know, I just want to give a shout out to our military, all of our active duty people from all of our countries around the world that are trying to knock down evil. So my hat's off to you guys, and we pray for you all the time.
Absolutely, and I echo that. Absolutely echo it. Anyone that's serving right now, if you're listening to this, a major, huge, warm welcome, and get in touch let me know. We'll give your unit a shout out if you're not on some kind of special ops. But yeah, a lot of time and respect for the men and women in the military. Now, Tony, this Cassini space probe, is there anything at all that we should be worried about when it's crashing into Saturn?
You mean it's not going to just do a nice soft touchdown into the clouds?
Nah, it's not just going to be a little farewell. Is there any possibility that something could happen here? And I was listening to you and Clyde last night. I mean, we're not looking at the ignition of Saturn, are we? Well,
that was the conjecture. And we came right out and said, this is all conjecture. We're just doing this, what if scenario. But people may have heard of this Project Lucifer, as it's called. And the theory is that the onboard plutonium, and there are 73 pounds of plutonium-238 on board Cassini, that somehow as it enters the atmosphere, which is primarily hydrogen of Saturn, that it might be detonated and ignite the planet and create a second sun, much like was presented by Arthur C. Clarke in the novel and the movie 2010. And the second sun in the sky at the end of that movie was presented. So it was purely just a hypothetical discussion, but it gave us an opportunity to talk a little bit more about to contaminate it with anything from Earth. And so they, just say, well, let's just let it go into the planet and we'll be done with it. Now, there might be more to it than that. We get into the whole idea of the golden age of Kronos, and Kronos is Saturn. And that's something that we've discussed quite a bit, and we'll talk about a little of that tonight again. But that was the primary reason, was because they didn't bother to sterilize it, because they never really felt that there was any issue until many, many years later when, there was testing not only by Cassini, but also spectrometer readings from Earth of the moon, and there was the possibility of water and therefore the thought of biologicals.
Now, Tony, when I look at these space probes, in particular ones like Cassini we're talking about tonight, we've all heard of these coronal mass ejections, and there's radiation flying about in space from who knows where. Does that not damage any of these probes, considering what it does to humans and things like that if we were to try and go into space? Does that not wipe out the electronics on these things?
Well, if we look at the geosynchronous to the sun, geosynchronous satellites that we have on the backside of the sun and on the Earth side, the Earth-directed side, they all have shielding because they're relatively close to the sun for the purpose of monitoring it on different wavelengths. But if you've got something that's doing a flyby and it's not specifically shielded for the purpose of monitoring the sun, and you have a coronal mass ejection take place, yeah, it definitely would damage something like Cassini that is not shielded, that would be flying by at a relatively close distance. And we're talking about faster than light energies in the form of X-rays and gamma rays. Those are synchrotron energies, and those are produced by the sun. And about thermonuclear bombs, plutonium-238. The fissile version of that is 239. And I don't know, we were more tongue-in-cheek, just kind of having some fun with perhaps a dark subject, even though we're talking about lighting up the sun.
And of course, anyone who wants to hear more about that Project Lucifer, which is a really interesting topic, I think Clyde mentioned this last night as well. A lot of that comes from the research of somebody called Bill Cooper. And before people say, oh, Alex Jones is Bill Cooper, don't even go there, folks. Do not go there. I've seen the conspiracy that's out there. Yes, very similar looking, but for me, no, it's not the same person. He also gets compared with Bill Hicks as well, who's a great comedian. But do not mistake the fact that Bill Cooper was the one that put this information together about the Project Lucifer. But something you said last night really stood out for me, and I want to go back to that, and it's the fact that when they launched Cassini, and this seems absolutely insane to me, but they never sterilized it, Tony. They never made sure it had no biological or organic compounds on it. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And that is the reason that they are directing it into the planet, into the atmosphere of hydrogen, rather than the possibility that once it loses its maneuvering fuel, it might run into Euclides or it might run into Titan, one of the two moons of Saturn, in which they think that, there's a possibility that life might exist or could exist. And then it gets into a whole discussion of, if they did ignite Saturn, would it produce enough heat and light energy to melt the ice on the moons and thus be able to sustain, spontaneous growth of bacteria that exists on those moons, possible bacteria that exists on the moons. And so they didn't want.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome back, everyone. Welcome to another Kev Baker Show right here on Truth Frequency Radio, TFRlive.com. I am Kev Baker. I'm your host for the next 2 hours, and I'm joined tonight by my good friend, fellow host on the network, author, researcher, public speaker, and fresh from an appearance on, he's my hero, right? Clyde Lewis's Ground Zero. Anthony Patch is here with us tonight as well. Now, for all you regular listeners out there waiting to hear about how Johnny Whistles is, I've been trying to get in touch with him past couple hours. No word yet. Fingers crossed. Hopefully, we might see him in hour number 2. But if not, again, lots of love, prayers, and energy sent to Johnny Whistles as he tries to recover from what sounds like the most horrendous kind of throat infection. I don't know what the heck he's got, but God willing, he'll be back soon with us here on the Kev Baker Show. And before we bring Anthony in, and you can find Anthony's work over at anthonypatch.com. Remember, tomorrow night, Max Egan will be here on the show for 2 hours. Same time, same place tomorrow. Kev Baker Show, TFRlive.com. I know you're all looking forward to that one. Looking at the chat room here, some new names in there. Big warm welcome whether you're in the chat room, listening live on TFR, iHeartRadio, TalkStream Live, TuneIn Radio. So many different ways to listen now. I just want to thank each and every one of you for continuing to support us. And tonight, myself and Anthony are going to be opening up with something called Cassini's Grand Finale. That's right, folks. We are going to be getting into Cassini tonight. And it was back on October 14th, 1997, which just happens to be 19 years ago, 10 months, 1 day, 17 hours, 35 minutes, and 30 seconds ago. Cassini was jettisoned off this planet and started on its journey. And here we are now, nearly 20 years later, Tony, and it's getting ready to do its death dive. I can't wait to get into all of this tonight, but how are you doing, sir? And very, very well done on Clyde's show last night. Loved hearing you on there. Great topics, great information as usual, man.
Well, thank you, Kev. It's always great to be with Clyde. I think that was the 5th or 6th time I've joined him on the air, and I've done 3 of his Ground Zero University events as a speaker. And Clyde and I have spent a lot of time in the studio together when I used to be on the West Coast. And he's so informed on so many topics. The guy is just a wealth of information. So I always learn from him every time I get a chance to join him in the studio.
Yeah, exactly. Every day he manages to put an essay together, the topics that he chooses and strings together. That's what's made him such a firm favourite of mine. And everyone knows that was the place I first heard you. And when you and Clyde team up together, there's a natural dynamic there. The two of you obviously get on. You cover all the same kind of topics. And last night, it was just brilliant. And I can't wait to get into some of this tonight because, like I was saying at the start there, Tony, nearly 20 years ago, Cassini, it blasted off from the planet. And here we are today now, approaching its grand finale. Cassini no more.
Well, 20 years ago, weren't you still in diapers?
Probably, yeah. I can't remember 2 weeks ago, let alone 20 years. I was actually serving my country when Cassini was blasted into orbit. There you go.